everyone. I'm glad to see you all today. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube on the Palmdale 2045 channel, and it is also being recorded. I'm Simran Malhotra, Principal at Ramey & Associates. We are leading the general plan update for the city of Palmdale. And today's meeting is a joint general plan advisory committee meeting and public meeting. And we'll go over the ground rules in a minute. Let me start by sharing my screen. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. The goal of today's meeting is to provide an update on where we are with the general plan and start discussing goals and policies on various topics. The topic for today is safety, hazards, and infrastructure. Before we get going, I'd like to have some introductions, starting with Carleen Saxton, who's the city's Director of Economic and Community Development. Carleen, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Sure, thank you, Simran. On behalf of everyone here at the city, including our city council and our mayor, we just wanted to say thank you for participating in tonight's meeting. We look forward to a lively discussion as always. And I just also wanted to say thank you to our General Plan Advisory Committee members for their commitment. And it's really nice to see all of them again. We kind of had a little rest, but we're ramped up. So I'm Carleen Saxton, the Director of Economic and Community Development. We also have Megan Taggart, our planning manager here at the city, Ben Fisk, one of our senior planners, to help answer any questions and just participate in tonight's discussion. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Simran.
Thank you, Carleen. We also have Ruben Hovanesian from the city's transportation department. I see him here. So welcome, Ruben. From our team, we have Melissa Stark, who's a senior planner with Ramey & Associates. And then from Rincon Consultants, we have Lexi Johnny, who's a senior environmental planner, and Andrew Hatt, who's a sustainability planner. They'll all be helping with the presentation today and helping facilitate this discussion. Let's start with roll call. As I call on you, please wave or verbally acknowledge when I call on you, starting with Tony Avila.
Present and good afternoon.
Welcome. Juan Blanco.
Present.
Lourdes Everett. I saw Lourdes earlier. There she is. Colby Essex.
Present, right here.
Teresa Hambro.
Good evening, everyone.
Good to see you. I believe Matt Harris was not able to make it today. Aurora Hernandez.
Hi.
Pat Hunt.
Here, here.
Kerry Kanashira.
I'm present, thank you.
Terry Lamping.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Debbie Rutkowski-Hines.
Here, hello everyone.
And Jason Zink. I don't believe Jason is here yet. Okay. Now Melissa will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand and place your right hand over your heart and begin after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, the first
it's Laura.
item on today.
You skipped me on the roll call.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Laura.
Okay, I'm here.
Welcome. Okay. First item on the agenda, motion to approve or deny the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on February 24th.
I'll make a motion to approve.
And I second.
Thank you. Melissa, do you want to open the poll?
Yeah, who was it that second? I just want to make that for my notes. Was it
Debbie.
It was me, Debbie.
Okay. You're going to see a poll in a moment. This is just for our GPAC members to agree or not agree with the motion to approve our GPAC minutes. I think we have all of our GPAC members. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. 90% vote yes and 1 abstained. Thank you.
You can close the poll on your screen by pressing the X on the upper right corner. Okay. Let's get started on the rest of the presentation. Just a few ground rules here. Firstly, we'll be stopping along the way to answer any questions that you might have. We'll also have several polls where we ask you some questions. While the members of the public are invited to ask questions during the presentation at the pause points, we also will have a public comment at the end of the meeting. After the presentation, we will have more extensive discussion, and we'll do that in 2 groups. We'll have the GPAC in one breakout room and the members of the public in a second room. And after the discussion, we'll do a report back so that everyone can hear what the discussion in each of those rooms were. Just general Zoom rules. I'm sure after a year and a half in this virtual world, we are all aware. Use your mute button unless you're speaking. Raise hand if you have questions. And video is optional, although I encourage all GPAC members to keep their video on. And then chat the host if you have any specific issues. I also would like that when you do have your questions and comments to keep them relatively short and to the point so that everybody has an opportunity to share. And then after the meeting, if you have additional comments or questions, please feel free to email them to the address on the screen, generalplan@cityofpalmdale.org. Okay, so let's start with another poll, and this is open for everyone. We just want to get a sense of who's been involved in this process to date. Melissa?
Thanks, Simran. We're going to launch our second poll. This actually has 2 questions. The first asks, how many general plan related meetings have you attended? And your options are, this is my first, 2 to 4 meetings, 5 or more meetings, or I am a GPAC member, more than 5 meetings. After you've answered that question, you can scroll down and you'll see the second question, which asks, how did you hear about this meeting? Your options are direct email, Palmdale 2045 website, Palmdale 2045, oh, there's a typo there, YouTube channel, Palmdale Magazine, AV Times article, I am a GPAC member, or other. Please take a moment to answer both questions and then we'll share the results with everyone shortly. Looks like everyone has voted. Sharing the results. For the first question, we have majority of folks in the meeting are GPAC members. We have 15% that this is their first meeting, 15% that have attended between 2 and 4 meetings. Great. As far as the second question goes, 8% had direct emails or the Palmdale 2045 website. 23% heard about it from another source, and the remaining 62% are GPAC members. And if you're still seeing the window, you can click the X in the upper right-hand corner.
All right. So for the benefit of those who are here for the first time, and as a reminder to those who have attended previous meetings, the next few slides will give an update of the project and the process that has been undertaken so far. Oops, this moved faster. All right. So just a quick reminder about what a general plan is. As you all might know, all cities are required to have a general plan, and this is a state requirement. And the general plan is a governing plan that provides overall direction for the future of a city. It starts with the community's vision for the long term or for the next 25 to 30 years. And it establishes how a city may change or grow and what the community's values and priorities are for its future. It also establishes the land use direction and the overall controls on development, which are then implemented by zoning. And that's a process that usually either is done contemporaneously or follows soon thereafter the adoption of a general plan. Based on the vision for the city, general plans contain goals, policies, and implementing actions that provide direction to city staff and city commissions and councils in their decision making. The last time the city looked at the general plan comprehensively was in 1993, or that's when they adopted the update. And since then, there have been many changes to the regulatory framework, the physical and economic landscape in Palmdale, as well as in the state and indeed the world. The city has grown dramatically in terms of land area and population. There's high-speed rail that's anticipated here, and there are new state requirements for general plans with regard to complete streets, health and equity, safety, and a whole host of other requirements. We also have Uber and Lyft, and we have potentially driverless cars on the horizon. And then the world has been impacted by a pandemic that's changing the very nature of how we live. So as we look at this general plan update, it'll build on the 1993 general plan, keep what's relevant, and revise and modify as needed. The Governor's Office of Planning and Research issues technical guidelines that tell the city what are the topics they must address in their general plan. And as I noted earlier, since the last adoption of the update of the general plan, there have been a series of laws that need to be addressed. There are 9 required elements that each general plan must have, and these are land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, air quality, environmental justice, and safety. And safety is the primary topic of discussion today. Besides these required topics, cities can choose to address other topics that are of importance and of relevance there. And in Palmdale, for example, because of Plant 42's presence, the general plan will have a chapter discussing synergies with military facilities. Another important topic that will be addressed here is how to create communities that are healthy, equitable, and resilient. And then economic development is a key priority for the council and the city, and that there will be a separate element on that topic as well. As I noted, we'll be addressing the requirements and policies for safety in our meeting today. So we've been working on the general plan for the last 2.5 years or so, and we've worked extensively with the community, with the General Plan Advisory Committee and decision makers to develop a vision and guiding principles. And then we created land use alternatives that we got feedback on, and based on that input, selected a preferred land use plan, and now are developing content for the general plan itself. And we are starting with the goals and policies, and we have a series of meetings on various topics that we'll have over the next 2 months or so. And throughout this entire process, we've had extensive community engagement, which has included many community meetings, both in person when we were able to do that, and virtual pop-up events, focus groups, surveys, workshops with the Planning Commission and City Council, as well as additional one-on-one stakeholder meetings as needed. Based on the engagement and what we heard, our team prepared major vision themes that are on the screen here. With each of these themes are guiding principles that are available on the project website for review for those who haven't seen those already. These vision themes provide a framework to guide future decision making. They're broad and they deal with all facets of life in Palmdale. These guided the development of the alternatives and the preferred alternatives, and now are guiding the goals and policies that are in the general plan. Some of the main ones that are relevant, especially to our discussion today, include preserving the city's natural setting, creating a safe and healthy city that's welcoming to all, as well as addressing issues related to the economy and creating more housing. The preferred land use plan that's been developed is shown on the screen here, and I won't go into a great amount of detail on it, but the map essentially establishes what uses are allowed on all the parcels in the city. Each parcel has a land use designation, and the descriptions for that are also available on the website if you haven't seen this map before. The major elements of the land use plan include land use designations for every property, as I noted. The yellow on the map is mostly residential. Besides that, there are areas focused on health and wellness districts. There's 3 of those located in the city. Education district, there are 2 locations for that. Continuing to focus on regional commercial uses around the Antelope Valley Mall, and then providing a host of options for mixed uses on either side of Palmdale Boulevard, with Palmdale Boulevard being a mixed-use corridor. So today, we are starting our discussion on policy frameworks. As I noted earlier, we are beginning the writing of the general plan document, and there are certain topics that the general plan must address. Policy frameworks are an interim step to get that feedback from the GPAC members as well as members of the community. For each of these topics, we have completed our technical analysis and we have heard from the community, and we now would like to review and solicit feedback on the key outcomes, goals, and policy measures. Today's topic is safety, hazards, and infrastructure with a focus on safety. A safety element, which is a required element of the general plan, establishes policies and programs that protect the community from risks associated with seismic, geological, flood, and wildfire hazards, as well as from other concerns such as drought. It also addresses issues related to climate change, emergency evacuation, and response. All these topics are required to be addressed in in the general plan by the state through the OPR guidelines that I had mentioned earlier. I will pause now for any questions that anyone might have to know. Hearing none. Now Andrew will present the existing setting. Andrew.
Can you hear me all right? So today I'll be going over some primary safety related issues as they relate to the general plan update safety element and summarize how they relate to state and local plans and policies. So you can go to the next slide. So like most of California, wildfires are a significant safety threat in Palmdale to both life and property. In Palmdale, the primary area subject to wildfire hazards is on the western portion of the city near the foothills. That is a high concentration area of natural working lands. So you get exposure increases with urban and wildland interface there. The general plan update will not increase development potential in this area as currently proposed. Any new development throughout all of California and Palmdale are subject to new LA County Fire Department and CAL FIRE wildfire prevention and protection standards. And as we all know, climate change is expected to increase these wildfire risks, making it more important to just think these through, add new policies and things like that. And that will be done both in the safety element as well as the climate action plan, climate change element of the general plan update, meeting the requirements by state law, and also by future emergency evacuation plans, local hazard mitigation plans, things like that. So if we can go to the next slide. There's the wildfire hazard zones. So to the west is that high fire hazard zone that I was talking about, right near a lot of the natural working lands in the hills around Palmdale. And then to the southwest and south are the majority of the other wildfire areas in Palmdale. So we can go to the next one, which is natural hazards. So Palmdale, as all of California, is subject to a lot of geological hazards, fault lines, things like that. The San Andreas fault zone is the primary fault in Palmdale, which if you go to the next slide, can illustrate that. And with the fault running right through the middle of Palmdale, there's potential for substantial ground shaking, liquefaction, and landslides throughout the city. Proposed growth areas and potential land use changes in the general plan update are generally outside of these types of hazard zones, but there's still risk. And the city will continue to implement state standards, including updates that may be adopted in the future. So we can go on the next one, which are hazards related to infrastructure. So first, with flood hazards, there are some potential land use changes in the plan that are subject to flood hazards, including particularly the area between State Route 14 and State Route Highway. Those areas are 100-year flood zones, and there are other zones within the city that are 500-year flood zones. So current city regulations limit the potential exposure to flooding and for new development in these areas.
Andrew,
Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I think your audio is not coming in very clearly. Could you maybe turn your video off? That might improve it.
How's that?
Not
Better?
really.
Hmm.
No. You know, try turning your video off. That might help.
I
Or,
can hear,
or go off Wi-Fi.
yeah, I'm able to hear him really well.
How's this?
Why don't you-
A little better at all?
Yes. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry about that. Apologies. So yeah, as I was saying, there's these flood hazards in the city, and current city regulations generally limit the exposure for new development in these areas and for flooding risks. But the general plan update does recognize that there will be additional coordination needed with FEMA and other state agencies to make sure that this flood potential is limited moving forward. So if you want to go to the next slide. So to the northeast of the city, there are the 100-year zones that I spoke of by State Route 14 and Sierra Highway. And then in central Palmdale are a lot of the 500-year flood zones. And then if you want to go to the next slide, the other major infrastructure-related safety issue is the location of emergency facilities in Palmdale. These are really important for their location and accessibility, especially in the event of an emergency. So currently, emergency facilities in Palmdale are generally adequate. There is the sheriff's station, the LA County Sheriff's Station, located in central Palmdale. It's a state-of-the-art facility constructed in 2006, so it has a lot of services that the community needs. And the Palmdale has 5 fire department stations also located within the city, and you can see those on the map. Most of these are out of the flood zones that was on the previous slide, but 1 and 3 on the map are pretty close. So in the future, coordination will continue to be important to both maintain these facilities and then also potentially increase the amount of facilities to maintain emergency response times as development expands within the city. So we can move on next to crime. The primary public safety and crime prevention agency in the city is the LA County Sheriff's Office, which just spoke of the station. And in addition, there's also the Palmdale Public Security Officers, Community Service Officers, and Park Watch, which all complement what the Sheriff's Office does with more preventative crime action. They monitor public parks, things like the Palmdale Transportation Center and other public facilities, by encouraging public eyes on the street to report suspicious or illegal activity. And then that's the code enforcement also assists with some other non-actionable calls. And overall, crime rates are declining in Palmdale. When looking at statistics, that's true for between 2015 and 2018. And that's consistent with longer term downward trends in crime in the city. But through community outreach for the general plan update, there has been expressed concern about safety in Palmdale. We're unsure right now if there's going to be any long-term implications related to crime from the pandemic. So in general, in the future, tracking crime, educating the community about active crime and city programs will be important to maintain public trust and public safety. And then if we move on to the next slide, airport safety. So the Palmdale Regional Airport and Air Force Plant 42 are both located in Palmdale. So this presents some potential safety risks due to aircraft accidents. So in general, development must be consistent with the Department of Defense's regulations. If an area is in an accident potential zone, these are set forth on the next slide if you wanted to go ahead with that. New buildings in these areas are located in a manner that promotes clear linear corridors to create potential landing options in the event of aircraft emergencies. So those are at the upper central part of Palmdale with the orange squares and rectangles. And so in these areas, incompatible uses, there are some incompatible uses for safety reasons. So these include mostly residential uses are not supposed to be in these areas. And so current incompatible uses in those low altitude overflight areas should be reviewed in order to determine the potential for redevelopment with more compatible uses in the future. So that's also in the general plan. And go to the next slide. So other hazards that will be addressed in the safety element include slope instability, mudslides and landslides, drought, dam failure, hazardous materials, and climate vulnerability, which will also be the subject of the next meeting about resilience on June 30th. So we can go to existing plans and programs. So the general plan safety element is just one of a variety of safety related plans that Palmdale has. This includes the general plan's public services element, the emergency operations plan, local hazard mitigation plan, which is currently being updated as well, and also different ordinances and policies in the Palmdale Municipal Code. We'll go to the next slide. So far from the community, on safety, the team has heard that the city needs to actively plan for the next earthquake, maybe develop an earthquake plan. The city also should address perceived crime, and especially at specific locations such as the Palmdale Transportation Center, which has been kind of noted as a special area. And then also with that, increasing law enforcement capacity if possible. So with that, I'll hand it off to Melissa with a poll question, I believe.
Thanks, Andrew. We had one question from the member of the public. I was just going to say, if someone wants to answer, we had one question from the public asking what the region of influence means on several of the maps that Andrew presented earlier.
So the sphere of influence, it's a planning term. The city boundaries are the city boundaries, which that's the land which is within the city's jurisdiction. But working with LAFCO, which is a regional agency that deals with the unincorporated areas around a city. So working with LAFCO, the city establishes the area or the sphere where it might potentially expand into the future, and that establishes what the sphere of influence boundary is. So if I can go to a map here, which shows the boundaries. So it might be a little hard to read, but this area here outside, the city boundary is shown in this black dash, and this area around it is what's the sphere of influence, that at some point in the future, the city may consider annexation. So it plans for it, but it doesn't have land use. It doesn't have zoning authority over it. That's done by the county because it's part of the unincorporated LA County. I see Anthony's hand raised. Tony?
Yeah.
Did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Andrew. Why are we only including the specific crime stats for 2015 through 2018 Don't you think it'd be more appropriate to include 2018 through 2021?
Yeah, so that was more meant just, oh, you want to go, Slim?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Andrew, did you want to answer that, or would you like me to?
Maybe you should with my audio. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Tony, the data that was presented with regard to crime was based on the existing conditions report that we prepared at the start of the project, and which was in 2019. So at the time, the best data that was available went up to 2018. And while newer data is available now, it's challenging to continually keep updating the data because these general plans end up being 3 to 4 year process. So the baseline that is established at the beginning of the project is the data that we report on.
Okay, so when we
with the
say that,
understanding that things may have changed.
so when we say that crime has decreased, are we specifically talking about crime has decreased between 2015 to 2018, or crime has decreased from 2015 through 2021 or 2018 through 21? Or do we know that?
I can answer that. So Tony and everyone else, so crime from 2015 to 2021 has decreased. It's consistent in the decrease that was seen as part of the existing conditions report. So we're fortunate here at the City of Palmdale. What we're doing seems to be working.
Great. Thank you, Carlene.
Welcome.
Debbie, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Tony just said. One of the things that we've talked about is perceived crime, or what people perceive to be a situation. And I think it's kind of hard to sell to my neighbors anyway, that crime's going down if we're using statistics that are old. So I understand why you wouldn't want to change them all the time. That is something that's in flux. But I think a lot of us have seen a lot of changes that are relatively recent. And I think it's important to have more recent crime statistics if we're going to deal with the perceived crime. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lexi.
I was just going to add that is something that we're going to go over when we talk about the potential goals and policies, if we've actually added additional policies to address that issue. So making sure the city has up-to-date and specific information related to crime and that it's readily available. So we'll go over that and can talk about it more as well in my section.
Thanks, Lexi. Jason, did you have a question? You're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering what year these maps were created. I noticed the fire hazard map. It didn't show the aqueduct. And what happened in Lancaster about maybe 5 years ago is that they redid their hazard maps, and they were able to save their homeowners on their homeowners insurance. All the homeowners saved money on their homeowners insurance. I was wondering if Palmdale could do the same thing. I noticed like in Rancho Vista, all those homes, the aqueducts there, so there's really no need for them to be in the high risk fire area. And also, I noticed all the homes that burnt down in LA and all around the state that had housing tracts. If they would have had a water pipe with rainbirds on it, that shoot out, 20 feet, 40, 50 feet circular, those houses would have been saved. So is there any way that we can implement a plan like that? And then on the flood control, Little Rock Creek and the Annie Verde City Ranch wash, we need more catch basins in there to prevent flooding, and if the dams break or anything like that, because that would save a lot of homeowners money on their insurance there. And I was also wondering on the air flight, the runway at Plant 42, the southwest runway, how much is that used? Because I've never seen any planes use that. So is that like an emergency thing, or that flies into like where the auto mall is on the map? You'll see. So is there any way that we could save people on their the commercial owners and stuff like that? And I know there's some houses that they're on Rancho Vista Boulevard too that are in that area that could also be saved. So just some ideas I wanted to throw out there. And the fire stations, I was wondering, why can't they be more proactive in the communities that surround them, the neighborhoods that surround them, and teach CPR classes and do earthquake preparedness? And, if people knew their local firemen and went to the fire station, if they had open house once in a while, I think it would create a lot of community pride, and I think it would make us more prepared for a natural disaster. That's it.
Thank you, Jason. I think you've touched on several topics that Lexi will be touching on in a few minutes. So I think we'll wait on that. Were there any other questions before we move on? And I think we had a couple of polls here as well, poll questions as well. Melissa, do you want to run the poll?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and launch our next poll. You should see something come on your screen shortly. This actually has 3 questions. The first asks, did any of this information surprise you? Options are yes, neutral, or no. If you scroll down, the next question asks, how prepared do you feel personally for a future emergency? Your options are very prepared, prepared, neutral, unprepared, very unprepared. If you continue scrolling, the next question asks, how prepared do you feel the city is for a future emergency? And you have the same options. Please take a moment to answer these questions and we'll share the results shortly. It looks like most folks have answered, so we're going to close the poll and share the results. So for the first question, most respondents said that no, the information did not surprise them. For question 2, personal preparedness for a future emergency, majority of folks feel prepared. Question 3, how prepared do you feel the city is for a future emergency? Majority of folks said neutral, followed by prepared. I'm going to close this poll now, and if you're still seeing the box on your screen, you can click the X in the upper right-hand corner.
Before we move on to the next section, Debbie, I see your hand up. Did you have another question?
Just really quickly, there have been some slides that have been shown tonight that I've been following through on the materials that were sent to us that are not in the materials and that were kind of interesting. And I'm just wondering if the slides that were not in the presentation that we received, if we would receive those slides. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll send the updated version. As we go through the slideshow at the last minute, there's often some additions we find that will be useful. So, but we'll make sure you have the latest version after the meeting.
And then just a reminder for folks, really quickly, on the project website, we do have the agenda for this meeting as well as the presentation in its current form. Folks who are joining us from the public, if you'd like to download a copy, please go ahead and do so at the project website, which is palmdale2045.org.
Thanks, Melissa. Now that we have established the background and the context for the goals and policy on this topic of safety, let's get into a little bit more detail about what the framework actually is. The policy framework, which all the GPAC members got with their packet and is also available on the website. It's a physical document. It's uploaded on the website and available for downloading there. And the presentation today summarizes the contents of that document. The document builds on the 1993 general plan, and these are our initial ideas for policy direction on the topic of safety and hazards and infrastructure. It doesn't include all the goals, policies and measures that the final general plan will cover. Rather, it articulates the general policy direction on the topic, with additional policies and measures that will be included in the general plan. These aren't an exhaustive list, but the ones that we want your feedback on. So if you don't see something that's important to you, please let us know. One of the goals for the general plan, and this is a city goal, is to support ongoing assessment of its implementation. So, cities prepare plans, you want to follow along, and these are long-term plans, and you want to be able to assess how well the city is doing in meeting the intent of the general plan. And so in order to do that, we are proposing clear outcomes that are tied to performance metrics, and these are both numeric and qualitative. And these can serve as indicators of success. These metrics then can be used to track, and the associated targets can be used to track progress. And as we go through this presentation, this will become a little bit more apparent to you. The goals and the policies, which will be in the plan and are in the policy framework. The goals establish the desired results. What are we aspiring to get to, the end result? And the policies are intended to provide the direction on how we achieve that result. So the intent of the goals and policies is to provide the direction for city staff and decision makers to use as they establish other actions, such as the CIP and other policy decisions that they make. And with that, I will turn it over to Lexi to talk about the policy framework for safety.
Thanks, Imran. So as we're here today to talk about the goals and policies for the safety element, before we get into that, just high level again, what Simran said is the outcomes for the safety element of the general plan of where the city wants to be in 2045 for the safety element relate to these 5 big topics. So wildfire risk mitigation, mitigation of impacts from geological hazards, so earthquakes, landslides. Also want to minimize impacts of flooding. Another desired outcome for the city is adaptable crime prevention. So crime prevention that evolves along with the different issues that our community faces over time. And lastly, adequate emergency evacuation. This is typically addressed in traditional planning documents in a different planning document called the Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, as well as the emergency response plans. But as this is becoming more and more of an issue in California, there's new legislation from the state to incorporate emergency evacuation into the safety element. So we'll have a new goal and a couple policies to address this as well. Next slide. And so how do we know that the different goals and policies that are in place in the element are achieving the results that the city wants? Well, here are just a few performance metrics that the city has for their safety element. And the newest one, the evacuation performance metric, that is to ensure there's adequate evacuation capacity for all foreseeable hazard scenarios. An additional one is to ensure there's 2 evacuation routes for all new development. So this number of 2 evacuation routes for new development comes directly from the state and is something that all cities are incorporating into their general plans. And then existing performance metrics that the city already had include crime rate. So having crime rates that are below the state averages, as well as response times from both fire and police. So both the fire emergency response time and the police emergency response time metric is to be under 6 minutes. So that's the national standard, which the city of Palmdale is below. Next slide. So now getting into what we're here today and what we want to get feedback from everyone on are the goals. So these boxes show the goals that are in the safety element. And there's actually only one new goal compared to the previous safety element, and that's the safe evacuation of residents. All the other goals, as you can see here, were already in the safety element. And because of new legislation and what we've heard from the community on what they're concerned about, we are going to focus today on the ones in the dark blue. So we'll be discussing minimizing wildfire hazards, minimizing crime, evacuation, and being self-sufficient in an emergency. And by self-sufficient emergency, there's a couple ways you could look at it, right? You could be thinking personally, in my household, am I ready with flashlights and food and whatnot? But we'll be talking about it at a community-wide level in terms of making sure the city has adequate emergency response resources, power infrastructure, and water supply. And then these other goals that are in the light blue, such as minimizing seismic hazards, flooding hazards, aircraft risks, and hazard material risks, those are in the safety element. We're just not going to go over those goals and policies today because there isn't any new legislation or any significant new information for Palmdale that we need to go over with the community at this point. But all the information that we do have in those goals and policies are on the website if you want to take a look at those. Next slide. So starting with the first goal is minimizing wildfire hazards. So the existing safety element already has pretty robust policies for minimizing wildfire hazards. And the bold ones that you can see here are ones that we've either modified or added. And then the non-bold ones are ones that were already in there that we did not, or at this point, we're not recommending changes, but the whole point of this meeting is we definitely want to get your opinions and thoughts on these goals and policies as they're still at the preliminary stage. So the first 4 that are bolded regarding making sure that redevelopment complies with fire safety codes, ensuring standards for construction, include a fuel modification program, providing heat resistant landscape buffer zones, and requiring property owners to maintain fire safe zones. The only changes that we're proposing at this point to these policies are that they account for any increased risk related to climate change. So this is guidance directly from the state that these type of fire hazard policies account for potential climate change modeling and thinking about not only the fire hazards that we have today, but how are they going to change in the future? So that's what we added to those policies. And then a new policy that we added, the third to last bolded policy, is all new development should, in the wildfire zone, should identify multiple evacuation emergency access routes. So this is also to comply with state guidance on making sure that all new development has the adequate evacuation access routes. Next slide. So this is the new policy that at this point we're recommending adding to the safety element, and that is for safe evacuation of residents. And the 3 policies under this goal right now are a designated emergency evacuation routes for various types of disasters. So considering disaster for earthquake, wildfire, a dam failure, and considering what are the different types of emergency evacuation routes for each one. And then making sure this information is readily available to all city residents. This one is an important policy as someone who's been in an evacuation zone. Knowing how to get that information and what to do about it is really important. And then the last policy is new development. Again, must have 2 evacuation routes. So this is no matter where you are in the city, wildfire zone or not, the state is mandating that new development have 2 evacuation routes noted. Next slide. Kind of on a similar topic, an existing goal is self-sufficient in an emergency. So at this point, we aren't proposing any changes to the existing policies the city has, but curious to hear if there are any other thoughts. And the main policies under this goal are updating the city's emergency operations plan, reviewing emergency service equipment and shelters to make sure they're adequate on an ongoing basis. City staff to also undergo regular disaster preparedness training that's ongoing. Residents and businesses maintaining clear signs, street signs to ensure that response time for emergency personnel is as fast as possible. And then lastly, having acceptable water quality and supply in emergency situations. Next slide. And this is the last goal and policies that we wanted to bring forth today. And this is the minimizing crime goal. So this is, again, a goal that's already in the safety element update. And the two policies that we're recommending to add at this time is tracking the type of rates of crime in the community. So as of right now, it's hard to get more granular data in terms of what type of crime is happening. And like you folks mentioned earlier, getting the most up-to-date data as well. So having a policy to track that type of information will help the city be able to address the different issues accordingly. And then making sure those statistics are readily available to the community. And then the other policies that are already in the safety element are maximizing safety and security through project design, such as adequate lighting for buildings and parking areas. Also continuing the formation and ongoingness of neighborhood and business watch groups. So encouraging that as well. And then making sure there's opportunities for positive law enforcement and youth interaction. Next slide. So that's a summary of the goals and policies at this stage in developing that policy framework. And so I think we are going to take a poll and then I'll have plenty of time for questions and comments.
Thanks, Lexi. So we're going to launch our last series of poll questions. You should see a new window pop up on your screen. There's 3 questions in this poll. The first one asks, which of these safety element topics or goals are you most concerned about? Your options are wildfire, crime, evacuation, emergency response, floods, earthquakes, aircraft, or hazardous material. If you scroll down, the next question asks, how important is it for the general plan update to address infectious disease planning or programs in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? Our options are very important down to very unimportant. The last question asks, during an emergency, which of the following are your biggest concerns? It does say to select your top 2 concerns, but I believe that the option here is to only select one. Apologies for that communication. Your options are communication, access to power or energy, at-home resources like personal preparedness, knowing where to evacuate, and evacuation routes. And if you'll just take a moment to answer those 3 questions, share the results with the group momentarily.
Melissa, the submit button isn't highlighted, so I can't submit.
Try. I'm not sure if I can relaunch it for you without relaunching it for the entire group. So I can just make note if you want to chat me your responses, I can make note. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and share the results with everyone. So you should now see the results. For question number 1, the top issue was crime for most folks, followed by wildfire. Scrolling down to question 2, most folks feel that infectious disease planning or programs are very important to be addressed in the general plan update. And scrolling down to the 3rd question, communication seems to be the top issue related to during an emergency, followed by access to power and energy. Okay, we're going to close that poll, and if you still see it on your screen, you can click the X in the upper right-hand corner. Thanks.
All right. Do we have any questions on the topic or the various goals and policies that have been presented so far? No? Okay. Now we've had a chance to talk and present, and now we'd like to hear from all of you. What we are going to do is split up all the attendees into 2 groups. The GPAC members will stay in the main room, and the members of the public will go to a breakout room for discussion. We'll have about about half an hour or so in the breakout rooms, and there'll be a facilitator. In the other breakout room, we'll have Ben Fisk from the city and Andrew facilitating that discussion. And then in the main room, I and Lexi will facilitate the discussion with the GPAC members. The main room will continue to be live streamed on YouTube. After the 30 minutes, you'll all come back to the main room. We'll have a report back on what was discussed. And then following that, we'll have public comment and next steps. So in the small groups, what we want to hear from you are these 4 questions, and we'll probably want to take about between 5 and 10 minutes each, given the amount of time we have. And the 4 questions are there any outcomes that we should consider? Is there anything we are missing? Do you have other suggestions for policy ideas to meet the goal, to meet the outcomes that have been established? And then also, which one of these seem like these are the right ones, and where do you think there's room for improvement? And then finally, if you have any other thoughts on these topics, we'd like to hear from you. Now, this is a discussion. We are not building consensus, but all the comments that we hear will be recorded by the facilitator and shared with the team, and then we'll take that into consideration as we update the materials for incorporation in the general plan. So, Melissa, are you ready to send folks to their breakout rooms? It'll take a minute or so, so please be patient.
Yeah, just a note. Thanks, Simran. So just a note that our GPAC members will be staying put, and members of the public will be disconnected very briefly and sent into a breakout group with 2 facilitators. So GPAC members, just sit tight for a split second, and then we can begin our discussion here shortly. Okay, I think we should be ready to go.
Okay, and Melissa, you'll send out a message few minutes in advance so people know how they're doing on time.
Yes, I'll monitor time for everyone.
Okay. Since it's a group, we all know each other well. We won't do introductions. I'm sure they'll do that in the other room. So let's start with, are there any other other outcomes that we should be considering? And I can flip back to any slide that if you want to, maybe I'll stop sharing this so we can see each other. Yes, Jason. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you talked about emergency evacuation centers, but I don't know of any. Do you guys have like evacuation routes already? Do we have that established in the city? Do we have evacuation centers to go to? Because I've never heard of that I can remember. That's it.
Lexi, did you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think officially in the documentation of the planning documents, there's called out emergency evacuation centers. And so I think that's something that a policy that's in what we'll be talking about next week for resiliency. They're pretty related topics, but we have policies in there to have a more formalized and established emergency center, community resiliency center, and to make that more well-known. Because yeah, being from a person where there's been fires and whatnot, having that information and knowing where those are and what to do is really important. So putting those policies in the general plan will be the first step on doing that. And they're also updating, the city is updating the local hazard mitigation plan right now too, at the same time to be done this year. So that's also going to be incorporated in that planning effort as well.
Yeah,
And I'll
'cause I
just
was
add,
thinking if,
oh, sorry, Jason.
Go ahead, Colleen.
I was just going to add that we do have an emergency operations center here at City Hall. Our EOC is actually at City Hall. And I'm sure some of you have seen recently for the high heat, our library is used as a cooling center as well as the Chimboli Center. So actually City Hall is our emergency operations center.
Yeah.
okay, I was thinking like if there was, I was just wondering if the power went out and the cell phone towers went out, would we go to our local fire station to get, communication? What would we do if there was a big, cyber attack and shut down all communications? Where would we go? What would we do? And I think we should have a plan where would people go, to spend the night or whatever that, most vulnerable that would need power for medical supplies and stuff. Should we designate all the high school gymnasiums in Palmdale as evacuation centers, or the Oasis Center, or Murray Kerr Park, stuff like that. That's what I'm more worried about, is cyber attacks, really, than anything.
Thank you, Jason. Benjamin from the city, I think you have a response.
Yeah.
Or a comment?
Well, in terms of a cyber attack, we don't have centers, but like right now we have an agreement with Edison for public safety power shutoff events. If it does affect our residents, we have activation centers that we would activate, and we would have people affected going to those centers to be able to use their cell phones, charge them, and take care of whatever needs they have that they can't do without electricity.
Thank you. So what's actually, it seems like the city has a lot of these facilities, and part of what the general plan or the policy framework is saying that there needs to be, this information needs to be readily available to the public, and there needs to be an educational campaign about information regarding these where these centers are and what kind of facilities are already available and what additional facilities might be provided, and that's what so when we talk about the metrics that we establish for these topics, we can begin to we can establish a metric, for example, that says once a year the city sends out a public interest mailer to every resident in the city, which describes or gives an update on where these centers are, so they have that easily accessible. I know all of us get a mailer from the gas company saying where your shutoff is, and a reminder what to do with an earthquake. So similarly, that can be an action as a result of the policy that's included in the general plan. But that was a good question. Other questions or other outcomes we should be discussing or including in the general plan? One.
Okay, so excuse me for not having my camera on just a second. One of the things that occurred during that disruption at Highland High School when there was an active shooter, we really didn't have a gathering location. There wasn't anything that I'm aware of, a plan in place for the parents to collect their children. If we ever had a major earthquake, do we have agreements with the school systems to utilize, to utilize the auditoriums and or gymnasiums as a staging area? So a little bit about me. Working for AT&T, I did a lot of emergency work, especially when it came to restoration of power and communications. So being trained in this area was critical in my line of work. So I'm just putting this out there so maybe it could be a consideration to work towards the future. Thank you.
Lourdes and then Debbie. Lourdes, we can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
No.
You can type a
Debbie,
message into the chat and I can share it.
Yeah. Debbie, why don't you go next while Lourdes figures out audio issues?
Okay, I just kind of wanted to touch on what Juan just said. All of your schools are required by law to have an emergency plan, and everything that you were talking about is actually in that. That emergency plan is then submitted to the fire department so that the city has access to it. So as far as emergency preparedness, evacuation, how that happens, all of that, those principles need to spell out specifically. So you just need to ask to see their safety plan and their emergency evacuation procedures. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. That's a good point. And also, as Lexi noted earlier, the city is currently updating their the local hazard mitigation plan, and that is required to be updated every 5 years. Correct, Lexi? Maybe Carlene, you or someone else can give an update on the timing of that.
I've got 2 questions in the chat or comments that I can share if this is a good time.
Okay.
I can give an update on that timing really quickly.
Sure.
So for the local hazard mitigation plan, they are reviewing the documents they used to compile that plan. They've conducted some public outreach, and they're anticipating that the updated document will be ready for submission by the end of the year.
Right. So the purpose of the LHMP is to be, it's much more action oriented, and it is focused on specific implementation actions that the city must take to deal with various hazards that the city might face. A new hazard that I believe is being considered here is dealing with pandemics. So anyway, so the general plan safety element references the LHMP because that has much more detail than the safety element may have. The safety element is more directional and broad in nature. Melissa, go ahead.
Thanks. So this comment or question asks, with respect to communication systems, do we have similar to Amber Alert since we all have cell phones? I think Carlene might be able to address that question or comment directly.
Sure. We just recently launched Text My Gov, and that is available on the city website. It's something that the residents actually have to proactively sign up for, but that provides any local direction should an emergency happen. An automatic text message goes out to the residents that are registered under Text My Gov. So I would encourage everyone to go to City of Palmdale and click on the link and register to receive those notifications. It's not something, an advertisement's not going to come to you. That information is kept completely confidential. So, yeah.
I got a
Thank
question.
you, Carlene.
Will the new internet system that's going to be installed in Palmdale, and I think Lancaster too, be implemented in a plan for emergency broadcasts of information?
So I believe what you're talking about is the work that we're doing with Sci-Fi, the laying of the fiber optic lines throughout the city. So that is essentially to provide high-speed internet capabilities and the fiber in the ground. The city will have an agreement with whoever the provider is to ensure that access is given to those who need it. And there's going to be further discussions about cost and service and all of that. But the fiber is being laid now, and it will, of course, enhance any future connections at that time.
Broadcast to all the residents in Palmdale of any emergencies. Thanks.
Melissa, you said there was a second email, second comment rather.
Actually, I've got a couple here, but I'm going to go through just to the next one I have in my list. This is more of a comment. If high school gyms are going to be emergency centers, they need to have generators, radios, battery storage, and emergency supplies such as beds and water. This continues on to say, also concerned about dead trees and brush in people's yards, city property and vacant land. Also fireworks, need to enforce and prevent fires.
Right, there's a lot in there. Lexi, did you want to talk about policies for brush clearance and or any of the other aspects of that comment? You can't hear you, Lexi. That is strange.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Weird. Headphones just stopped working. Yeah, so the policies we have now in the safety element, like when I went over, is pretty broad in that they reference the fuel management programs that the city has in place, but doesn't lay out like those exact actions that you discussed. It talks about the buffer zones and maintaining those, and then the municipal code has the actual details in terms of like, this is the size that the buffer needs to be based on the hazard risk, and these are the exact fire fuel management activities that you need to have. So that's more in the code where the specifics are. and the general plan references those. So I guess we'll make sure they are, yeah, they're already in there in terms of adding anything to the policies right now with those fire requirements. We can add examples of continually update the code based on the latest fire requirements. And I was going to say the fire requirements are also in line with the county fire requirements too. So, and the safety element also goes to the state, CAL FIRE, and the Board of Forestry now for review, which it didn't before. So this is a new legislation where we actually have to get state approval to make sure that we have the latest and greatest policies in the element.
Yeah, and CAL FIRE generally has been, based on some of our other experience on general plans, has been requiring a significant buffer around properties that fall within the very high fire severity zones, as well as and a slightly smaller buffer when it's just in the high fire severity zone. That can be also a metric that can also be a metric that can be added to the safety element in terms of being able to keep track of how much brush was cleared every year, how annual visits occur. I know start of the fire season, fire officials often go door to door, doing inspections and asking for that fire brush clearance to occur. Lourdes, were you able to get your comment in, or were you able to figure out your audio? Lourdes? Sorry, we can't hear you. You want to send us chat. Melissa added in the chat, if you can text Palmdale to 91896 to be added to the city's emergency text message system. So,
I just sent the second
service
line, and there's another option, another number to text as well.
Just for Lourdes, of course, you can always email us any thoughts to our general plan team. Since you're having a little bit of technical difficulties, we don't want to miss out on your input. So feel free to email us after the meeting today. Just keep your notes and we'll incorporate.
Yeah, and feel free to chat as well. Melissa is monitoring that. So of the policy ideas that have been discussed so far, which ones resonate the most? Thoughts on that? Or are there other considerations for policies or goals that we should consider in the safety element? Well, since everyone is very quiet, I will do what I tend to do, call on folks. So let's see. Colby, do you have any thoughts or comments on what you have heard so far? Not. Well, other comments, questions? Debbie.
Yeah, I just had one question about the buffer zone. I noticed you talked about one of the new fire safety ideas was to put a buffer zone between fire areas and homes. My specific question or comment is basically we were talking about the Western Mountains being a fire hazard, which is, and there are some houses in Rancho Vista that are right on that hillside there. Are we thinking, or is the general idea, is those houses to put buffer zones behind them? Because I know a lot of those people have been fighting fires right over their back fences. It's happened to them before. So is that something that we're considering? Because that seems like a great idea for some of those houses that are on the other side of Rancho Vista in those hills. Thank you.
Yeah, so right now, as the policies are, which is what you guys Palmdale had already, is it requires property owners to maintain a fire safe zone of minimum of 30 feet from a structure or to the property line, whichever is closer. And then if you're located within the very high fire severity zone, then you're required to have brush clearance 200 feet from structures to the property line. So it's all around it in the back part as well. That's obviously seems like the more important part for the way it's written in the policy. It doesn't clarify the location.
Yeah,
I'm just around the property.
Thank you. I'm just thinking that some of that property, it's pretty steep behind those houses. And so brush requirement for those people would be difficult, if not impossible, depending on whose house it was. I think it's a great idea. When I saw that in the presentation tonight, I think it's just really great to formalize that and codify it, because it is really important. We are in a really bad wildfire area. I was just specifically interested, if I got questions from people who live on the other side of Rancho Vista, what kind of what was happening in that regard. So thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Terry?
So one thing
sorry, go ahead.
So one thing that comes to mind for me is illegal fireworks. I feel like it's been the 4th of July for the past couple months. I don't know about your area, but I'm sure that might fall under the fire safety and concerns about that. That's what's coming to mind, especially with the holiday season coming up. But like I said, it feels like it's been the 4th of July for the past month or so already.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I don't think I've seen a city plan yet that really calls out fireworks per se. Doesn't mean we can't look at it and potentially include it in a policy. So your main concern is fireworks and fire safety, fireworks and noise. Those are kind of the two that I can think of.
And Lexi, I can add a little bit because we do, as I'm sure this team is aware, have quite a bit of restriction within our municipal code in regards to fireworks. And it is a very big issue here, illegal fireworks. So one of the things that our city council just adopted on Tuesday night as part of our biannual budget was a 3rd violation increase in the fee to potentially continue to deter and let our community know the severity of doing those violations. We also have our neighborhood services team doing some education. They've been doing it, but they're really ramping up here in the next week, really doing that community outreach, working with our fire stations, as well as our sheriff's department to make sure that we do whatever we can to reduce the amount of the illegal fireworks that go off, because we do know it is a problem here and we're trying our best to make sure that we're all safe.
Yeah, thanks for that update, Carlene. Terry, you had your hand still up. Do you have another question as well? Okay. Are there any other topics that we haven't touched on safety that we should be talking about? We did say that there were a few other policy or outcomes that we didn't spend a lot of time on today, but they will be addressed in the safety element. So with regard to any of those topics, are there other thoughts that you might have?
I have something. I have an idea.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. Basically, most of the trouble that comes from crime is from people that rent houses or rent apartments. And I've always suggested this probably for over 10 years. The city right now, they require landlords to register their rental homes with the city. So they have all the information. So each time the sheriff goes to these homes for problems, the landlord never knows. So why can't the city and the sheriff work together to notify the the landlord and the resident, like even a postcard or an email? I have many friends that own many houses all through the Antelope Valley, and they never knew that, the sheriff department visited their property 6 times and that it was a known, drug selling house and stuff like this. And what happened, the thing got so out of hand that, and they didn't pay rent or anything like that. The guy ended up losing. A lot of them just said, forget Palmdale, we're just going to let the house go back to the bank. So why don't we do more prevention? Since we got the landlord's information, the sheriff department could just hit one button. I don't know how you do it, but the thing is, landlords need to know about the problems so they can be part of the solution in eliminating bad renters in our city. That's it.
Thank you, Jason. Carlene, you look like you want to respond.
Thank you, Jason. That is a very creative idea. We have landlord notices if there's an actual violation issued by code enforcement, but reaching out to the sheriff's department to do something like that is something that we can work on to have that advanced noticing to try to reduce the amount of issues that come. So I'll make sure that our neighborhood services director who oversees the sheriff's contract hears that idea.
And we can also include it as a policy in the general plan for that ongoing coordination with the sheriff's department. So thank you for that. Other ideas? We have 5 more minutes before we do a report back and bring the other group back in. So this is your chance.
I see Lourdes was trying to talk again. I'm not sure if it was working. No. Oh no.
Still not.
We want to hear you.
Did you want to try and log back in, Lourdes? Maybe that'll help.
It's showing as being muted. Like Lourdes, up at the top of the screen, do you see a microphone with a red line through it? If you do, click on it.
She's unmuted on our side.
Okay.
Is your phone muted? Are you on your phone? No? No.
And not to rush anyone if there's remaining thoughts, we definitely want to use the time. But Andrew did message me that he said the other group is ready to join together at any time as well.
Okay.
I got one more real quick one. Can the
Yes.
city coordinate with the school districts on bicycle and pedestrian safety with the kids?
I think that's something that
could
we
you
could
elaborate on? Sorry, Lexi. Pat, could you elaborate on the issue?
Well, public safety, kids ride their bicycles down the street, swing it wide into the traffic. They don't. When I was a kid, I remember the city and the school district coordinated a bicycle rodeo, and kids got to go out and show their skills on their bicycles and how well they could do it. And the city and the school district monitored it and helped teach the kids the right way to do things. And then being a good pedestrian goes a long way. When I was a kid, you went to the curb, you looked both ways and waited for the traffic to clear, and then you crossed the street. Nowadays, they just walk out into the street like zombies. They need to take some responsibility for getting run over by cars. So that's it. It just seems like they're not getting taught from home.
Yeah, Lexi, you were going to.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it's definitely worse now with phones.
Hey, Simran.
People are not looking at, but we can see if like the safety element or the public services or the transportation circulation element, there's a lot of different opportunities in the general plan to address that issue. So we'll definitely make a note of it and we'll add that in there.
Sorry to interrupt you, Lexi. Lourdes, can you mute or turn down the volume on your device? Lourdes is on my phone and she was going to talk through my microphone.
Okay, thank you for arranging that.
Thank you guys so much. One of my concerns, because I do live in, I'm sorry, I need to.
Yeah, if you just turn down the volume on your computer.
So one of the concerns that I do have, I do live in the red zone, fire hazard area. One of the concerns, we do have a fire and utilities are not working on this communication, and that was, we all have cell phones, and I know at least that communication, what type of communication will people in a fire hazard area would have. And I think you guys kind of answered that, but that is basically, a concern for me and some of my neighbors, because we've been evacuated, quite a few times since I've lived here.
Thank you, Megan and Lourdes. Lexi, did you hear the comment?
I think generally I heard what is the communication related to if a wildfire does happen in the evacuation. Is that the question? So yeah, I think it depends, right, on how close you are to the fire. I know when I've been very close to a fire, the police come door to door and if that's like the level of evacuation that they need to do, then they'll do that. Otherwise, it's kind of a text system is what I've experienced too in cities where you get a text for evacuation. I don't know if you guys have any other certain types of communication that you use.
Yeah, Melissa shared the city's new information about the city's new emergency alert system.
Text my gov.
Text my gov. Okay. Well, I think Melissa is going to bring in the folks in the breakout room while we are waiting. Are there any other thoughts? And then Lexi, will you be prepared to do a short summary for those who were for the report back?
Sure, I can do that.
Thanks.
I think Ruben had one thing to share on our last discussion.
Yeah,
Is that right,
while
Ruben?
you're doing that, I'll address, Patrick, what you were saying about education for the kids these days. The city definitely recognizes the need for doing more outreach and more education in that area. We've recently pursued several grants to be able to get some funds to do those kinds of planning efforts and outreach. So that's in the works in the coming 2 years to actually implement some of that and go forward with it. Usually we get, not just us, but other cities get help from nonprofits, such as the LA County Bicycle Coalition, and their local groups for us would be the High Desert Cyclists, who hold those bike rodeos for the students at schools. And I've gone to several of them. They're a lot of fun to do. Good education opportunities, hand out helmets, fit the seats and everything. So definitely something on our radar to address. And any help is appreciated.
Thank you, Ruben. Yes, Teresa.
Years ago, when I was a kid, AAA used to be involved with kids and crosswalk safety and bicycle safety. I don't know if they still do that, but that was something that I remember doing when I was in school.
Yeah, I haven't heard of them doing that recently, but certainly something to look into. Okay. Do we have everyone back, Melissa?
We should. The breakout rooms are closed. We should have everyone in the main room now.
Okay. So Ben, are you doing the report back or is Andrew?
Andrew, you were taking notes. I took notes as well, but do you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure.
And actually, am I seeing, did we lose somebody or is everyone back?
Yeah, I think there's some folks who aren't on anymore. Maybe they left.
Yeah, I think we lost Suzanne. Oh, no, there you are. Suzanne's here. Okay, no, we're good. Okay, thank you.
Should I just run through the facilitator workshop worksheet?
Sorry, Ben, if it is possible for you to summarize, Andrew, we're having a really hard time hearing you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So with regard to the first question, are there any outcomes that we should consider? One of the residents mentioned that she lives in Ana Verde and is concerned about fires and would like to see, let me see here, would like to see a program that maybe helps educate residents of Ana Verde about fire hazard, and also about evacuation. It was mentioned that the city can have great evacuation plans, but if people don't follow the plan and actually evacuate, it creates a lot of problems. Apparently in past fires, there have been a lot of looky-loos, and people want to watch the fire or don't want to leave until the last second, or want to stay and protect their homes as well. And the city's plans need to address those issues, and we need to notify the residents of those plans so that they're aware of what to do and also what not to do. We've learned lots of lessons of people because they don't know what to do, they do the wrong thing. One example that was brought up, of course, was with COVID. Everyone ran out and bought toilet paper, and it was a little difficult to understand why that became the issue. It was also brought up that possibly flyers or brochures could be prepared in advance for different types of hazards be it earthquakes or fire or whatever, and making sure that those are circulated to different areas of the city or to the entire city so that people can be aware, sort of like we do with earthquakes, where you tell people to have an earthquake bag ready or to have water ready, but to have a plan for evacuation or a plan for a fire or a plan for another type of event, hazardous event. We also discussed the street racing accident recently and how that sort of ties into safety concerns about the roadway and making our roadways safer for cyclists and for other forms of transportation, other modes of transportation, and what could be done possibly to help with making the streets safer. We also had a little bit of a discussion regarding flooding and sort of tying into capturing our water and recharging our groundwater. Moving on to any policy ideas that we should consider. We discussed briefly looking at Fox Field as an opportunity for an airport versus Plant 42. We looked at the city's mechanisms for notifying residents when there is an emergency or an evacuation, and making sure that that is included in the plan. How do we notify residents? How do we notify them quickly? And are we using all of the opportunities available to do that? All the methods available to do that. See here. Oh, and using city events as an opportunity to connect to the residents and connect community and share information. There was an overarching discussion about the importance of feeling a sense of community and how that has a very, very positive impact on the city and ties into lots of other issues. Neighbors looking out for each other and having a cleaner city and reducing crime, all through a sense of community. And that was a very big sort of overarching issue. With regard to policy ideas and which one resonated the most, crime, of course, seemed to be the most, I guess, prevalent part or prevalent concern. The one more likely to impact someone's daily life, although the others are big events. Crime seemed to be the biggest one of most concern. And that goes in line with the poll that we did earlier as well. And then we also had some share outs about other things like food trucks and community gardens as more opportunities for building community. The food truck events are tend to be seen as positive events, and not only provided for the community to come together, but also provided a valuable resource during COVID. We talked about community cleanups as well, and those happening on a weekly basis. But that's an opportunity not only to build community, but also to help clean up the community. I think that's about all we have for this, for our discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for the great update. Lexi, are you ready with the GPAC group update?
Yeah, we had a lot of similar themes to the other group, it seems, with maybe a few other different topics that came up. So another common theme was around emergency evacuation centers, having questions of where they are in the city. And we discussed City Hall as being the main emergency center. But in terms of policies and ideas for updating the general plan, making sure that the city has education regarding where evacuation centers are, when they're to be used, and a potential metric. An idea that came out is the city could potentially once a year send a newsletter in the mail regarding emergency centers. Some other ideas that were good that came from the group, saying that schools are a good resource for emergency centers as well, and that the schools have safety and emergency plans already. So the city should look at those and incorporate them into city planning and have some cross collaboration there. And another concern came out about locations, not only for wildfires and whatnot, but active shooting gathering locations as another concern. And there's already agreements with the school system to use gyms as a safety center there. So a lot of really good ideas to bring in kind of all those different planning at the different levels, but really coordinating. And after that coordination, making sure that it's communicated with residents. So everyone's in the loop, everyone can feel more prepared if emergency does happen, that they know where to go, what the plan is, what the resources are, what's closest to them. So that was a lot of our discussion. Oh, and I guess on that too, in terms of getting that information out there when emergency does happen. We talked about Palmdale's emergency text message system. And so it was in the chat, so you guys can probably see it, for residents to sign up there, as that's the most streamlined way to get information when an emergency does happen. So potentially more education to make sure everyone's signed in for that text message system. Some other newer topics that came up that we didn't cover in our presentation was a concern about fireworks as potential safety and noise issue. And the city talked about how they're taking illegal fireworks very seriously and have city plans and ordinances to be able to enforce to decrease the amount of illegal fireworks that happen within the city. So our planning team can look at potential incorporation of that into the general plan as well, especially if the city is already doing all this work, then the general plan can make reference to that and make sure that continues to happen over the planning horizon. And then also about crime. Crime came up as well. And there was an idea from our group about a way to help mitigate crime is when crime is associated with the renters within the city, that potentially landowners could be informed when police enforcement or the sheriff comes to the house of renters. The landowners don't have any idea of this, so there could be potential more ongoing coordination with the sheriff's department to see if maybe that's a way to help mitigate crime within the city. And then the last new policy idea was around public safety in terms of pedestrian safety with the youth around schools. So similar to the other group, I think you guys heard at the tail end, is potentially having public safety educational events regarding bike and pedestrian safety is something that can be a policy within the general plan. Yeah, those are the main topics that we discussed in our group.
Thank you, Lexi. So having heard what both groups discussed, there were clearly a lot of common themes and as well as some new ideas. So thank you all for your input on that. We'll take that into account as we refine the policy framework and incorporate it in the general plan. The next item on our agenda is public comment. I know the members of the public, you all got to speak in this breakout room, but if you had something you'd like to state for the record for the whole group, this is your chance. Looking at the time, we'd probably want to have a minute each. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Hearing none, not seeing anyone. Let's move on to next steps. Let me just share my screen again. Melissa, do you want to walk through the online option for providing comments?
Yeah, if you want to jump to the next slide. So we're introducing a new feature for folks. We are uploading all of our framework documents to a site called Conveyo that is directly linked on the Palmdale 2045 project website. This gives you the opportunity to scroll through and read the document, and while you're reading, you can make comments. So this bar at the bottom of the screen here shows some of the features of Conveyo that you'll see on the project website. Starting from the from the left, you have the opportunity to zoom in and zoom out, page up and page down. When it's embedded on the project website, you can't download directly, but we have a link just above the Conveyo embed, so you can download there as well. If you'll go to the next page, or the next slide, this is what it'll look like. If you go to the next slide, when you click anywhere on the document, you'll see this second box pop up where you can type in your name, your email address, and your comment. You go to the next slide. You'll also have an opportunity to not only submit your own comment, but see what other folks have to say as well. You can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you agree or disagree, and you can have a direct comment in response to someone else's comment. So it's a nice way to see what other folks, how they're reacting to the document as well. These will be up on the Palmdale website through the end of the summer. We're going to be having several meetings related to the policy frameworks, and so we'll upload all of these separately, and you'll have the opportunity to review and provide your comments as well as view other folks' comments. I'll be sending out a link in the chat, and actually if you go to the homepage of the Palmdale 2045 website, there's a direct button you can click on to be taken to this new page.
Thank you, Melissa. And in addition to using Conveyo, if you feel more comfortable in just sending an email, please do so at the generalplan@cityofpalmdale.org email address, and all that information will be taken into account as well. So just very briefly, we have 5 more meetings coming up in the next 6 weeks or so. The dates are on the screen here. The next meeting is on June 30th, 2 weeks from yesterday, in almost 2 weeks. And the topic at that meeting will be resilience, sustainability, and climate change. And as Lexi mentioned earlier, there's certainly overlap with the safety element, given that the state now requires us to address climate change as an impact on safety related issues. So you'll hear some of the same themes at that meeting, but looking at it from a different lens of sustainability and resilience, as well as addressing the topic of climate change. And then we have 2 meetings in July that address land use, mobility, and housing. And then in August, we'll talk about economic development and military readiness. And then finally end with health, equity, parks, and public facilities. So a lot of new information coming your way, but it's based on what we've already heard from you and discussed with you in the past for the most part. We also have a EIR scoping meeting just before the next meeting on June 30th. So that'll start at 5:30. And the purpose of that meeting is to discuss what are the topics that should be analyzed in the environmental impact report. The general plan is required to have an environmental impact report, which assesses the impacts that the plan may have, and that this is again required through CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And we'll talk in more detail about what that means and at that meeting. So mark that on your calendar starting an hour earlier if you're interested in joining it on June 30th. As we go through these meetings through the rest of the summer, we are also beginning to prepare the actual general plan document itself, and we will be that'll be available for review at the start of 2022, and then we plan to be at in front of the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption during early spring of 2022. So lots going on. We are seeing the end in sight, but a lot of work that we all need to do together to get there. So again, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. And any last words, Carlene, or anyone else for that matter?
Yes, thank you. So as Simran said, we gave you a break to make sure that you were geared up for this high level of intense engagement that we're about to take. And tonight was that kickoff. So thank you for the thoughtful conversation tonight. As always, it's really wonderful to hear everyone's input. And I feel like we got some good feedback to take forward and consider and adjust and bring forward at a future time to our decision makers. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you in just under 2 weeks. So yeah, have a wonderful evening, and that's it.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.